Hi, I'm Evelyn Miller. I'm an actor based in London, England. I've worked for the Royal Shakespeare Company, Shakespeare's Globe, the National Theatre, and I'm also an associate director of Actors from the London Stage. Who are we and what do we do? Well, we were founded in 1975 by Sir Patrick Stewart and Murph Swander, and we tour to colleges and universities around the United States. 5 actors perform full-length Shakespeare plays with minimal sets and props. I find it an incredibly exciting way to work because it really concentrates our focus. Ironically, when what we love about Shakespeare are his words, I find they're all too often lost in a haze of concept and odd voices and tankards. I think stripping it back offers us an amazing opportunity to just really focus in on the language. As well as performances, we also run workshops. I believe really passionately that the best way to study and experience these plays is live and aloud. These plays were not meant to be read, they were meant to be heard. Literacy levels in Elizabethan England were low. We know that the word audience, audio, and auditorium all share a root, the Latin for to hear. Hamlet says we'll hear a play, so on his good advice, today we're going to speak the text aloud as much as possible. I'd recommend having the text in your hand. There's a collection of the text we'll be using that you can print or use on another device. If you're not able to do that, it's totally fine. The text will be up on the screen, so there's no excuse. If we give credence to the fact that these plays were meant to be performed, listened to, we must also take into account that flexible interpretive choices by actors from Elizabethan times onwards have played a huge role in shaping how audiences experience these plays, especially those that contain contentious issues and complex subjects. Through exploring interpretation and speaking text aloud, I believe we can really start to investigate what these words mean to us, both personally and as a society. How and if they resonate with our society and experience today. I find it really troubling and a bit irritating, frankly, that we're often taught that all of Shakespeare's plays and poems are relevant to us all and are universal without being encouraged to investigate that idea. Do you see yourself in Shakespeare's work? Which aspects of yourself? What's omitted? For me, there are aspects of Shakespeare's work that I find deeply problematic, as you'd expect from someone writing over 400 years ago in a society that had some very different ideas and very different ideals. There are aspects of the teaching of Shakespeare, both now and throughout history, that I find questionable and alienating. However, I can honestly tell you that I love his writing. I have found in it some of the most profoundly eloquent depictions of love and struggle, envy, loss, friendship, loyalty, and hope that I've come across in the English language. Plays and poems that I've read numerous times will, after certain events happen to me or in the world around me, seem to gleam with a new relevance. Which brings us pretty neatly to the play we're exploring today, The Merchant of Venice. The Merchant of Venice has definitely entered the public consciousness. Even if you've never seen, heard, or read the play, you might be aware of the pound of flesh, the character, Shylock, or Portia's suitors choosing between gold, silver, and lead caskets to win her hand in marriage. Spoiler, as Shakespeare wrote, all that glisters is not gold. The play is set, as you've probably guessed, in Venice. It follows Antonio, the merchant, and a Christian as he borrows money from Shylock, a Jewish moneylender, so that he can lend it to his friend Bassanio. They agree that Antonio will not pay any interest, but that if he fails to repay his loan on time, Shylock will claim a pound of his flesh. It's often referred to as a problem play, which means it can't be easily categorised as either a comedy or a tragedy. The complexity of the issues it raises are huge, and Shakespeare shows us both flaws and merits in almost every character we encounter. His writing of Shylock, in particular, seems to swing wildly between a prosaic depiction of a villain that relies heavily on anti-Semitic tropes and a deeply moving and complex study of the effects of oppression, persecution, and loss on a human being. We're going to look at one of Shylock's, and indeed Shakespeare's, most famous speeches. I'll give you a bit of context. Shylock is on the Rialto, the financial heart of Venice. His daughter Jessica has just run away from home. She has renounced her faith and eloped with a Christian. She's also stolen huge sums of money and valuable jewellery from her father. Shylock encounters two gentlemen, also Christians, who mock him and the loss of his daughter. The conversation then turns to Antonio's lost ships at sea and the contract that they have drawn up, a pound of flesh, if he cannot repay his loan. I'd like you to read Shylock's response aloud. I'm not trying to embarrass you in front of your classmates or neighbours or pets. This language is visceral, and the more we can experience it physically, the more we'll gain. I'll read the lines Shylock reacts to, and then give you some time to read his response aloud. Salerio says, "Why, I am sure, if he forfeit, thou wilt not take his flesh. What's that good for?" Great. Before we really start to delve into the text, I'd love you to discuss, or if you're alone, consider or note down your first reactions to what you read. I'll give you a few minutes to consider your first responses. Did any lines or words jump out at you? Did any images stay with you? Do you recognise any of this language? Was any of it familiar to you? Did any of it surprise you? As an actor, I'm always looking for ways to better understand what's happening in my character's head. Shakespeare is incredible at giving us clues, both in prose, language and text that doesn't have a set rhythm to it, like this one, and verse. His actors wouldn't have had the luxury of loads of rehearsal time, so Shakespeare needed to make sure that everything an actor needed to know was contained within their role. We get that word from the roll of paper that actors would have had their parts written on in Elizabethan times. Even in prose, we can learn a huge amount from a character's rhythm. This is an exercise I love to use. I do it all the time. It's called walking the punctuation. If you have limited space to move, don't panic. Even walking on the spot is better than nothing, I promise. So, speak Shylock's text aloud again, but this time walk around the room that you're in as you do it. Each time you reach the end of a sentence, be that a full stop, a question mark, or an exclamation mark, stop, turn, and start walking again as you start a new sentence. Take note of sentence length, how that shifts and changes. Take note of the shortest, maybe the longest sentence, and see how it feels to really move with the text as you speak it. I'll give you a few minutes. I'd like you to take a few moments to discuss or consider what you discovered. Which were the shortest and the longest sentences? Did the sentence structure shift throughout the speech, and how? What do you think this might suggest about the character's mindset? Did this exercise shift your emotional experience of reading the speech in any way? How? Great. We're going to repeat the exercise, but add more detail with some additions to the original rules. So, full stop is going to stay the same. Stop, change direction, and restart when you start speaking the next sentence. When you get to a semicolon, keep moving, but turn 180 degrees. Commas. Keep moving, but subtly shift your direction. When you get to a question mark, stop and reach your hands out. Ideally towards a person. We want this to be an action of questioning. You want something when you ask a question. You want an answer. When you get to a hyphen, I would like you to push your hand through space as you get to the point in the sentence where the hyphen is. I'll put the instructions on the screen and give you a few minutes to repeat the exercise. Pretty frenetic in parts. I think it's always really interesting to consider what is it that keeps a character speaking. What do they still need to know or impart or gain that compels them to continue to speak? This speech in particular often feels to me like a dam bursting. The long, long lists, the many commas as Shylock refines and tries to hone his argument that he needs to make. With the constant shifts in sentence length, we can almost feel as we speak it his attempts to control his breath and his emotion so he can speak with the clarity and the logic that he needs to as the emotions threaten to overwhelm him. I'd like us to spend some time thinking about the rhetoric, the types of argument that Shakespeare gives Shylock to make. Aristotle thought there were three types of rhetoric arguments. Pathos, something that appeals to the emotion of the listener. It has the same root word as empathy or sympathy. Logos, a logical argument. Ethos, something that gives the listener an idea of your authority to be speaking on the subject, your trustworthiness, your similarity to the listener, or maybe your reputation. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Or the many, many politicians throughout history who have claimed to be just like us, a man of the people, even though perhaps they weren't. So, read the speech aloud, you can stop walking around the room, but this time I'd like you to, whenever you think it's pathos, an emotion, touch your gut. Whenever you think it's logos, a logical argument that Shakespeare has given Shylock to make, mark it out on your fingers like this. Whenever you think it's ethos, something that gives the listener the idea that you are someone to be respected on this subject, that you have the right to speak, I would like you to touch your chest. Lovely. There's no correct answer, there's lots of different interpretations. It's part of what makes this exercise really interesting, I think. So, speak the text aloud, off you go. Which of these rhetoric devices did you feel was used the most? If you're doing this workshop alongside other people, did you notice a variety of different options and opinions in the room? You can spend a lot of time picking apart the best political speeches in history to see how they've utilised these different types of rhetoric to make a point, to move their audience, and to appeal to the widest variety of people. It's something you can definitely aim to use in your own writing. The powerful use of rhetoric in this speech makes it impossible for an audience to ignore Shylock's humanity, his plight, and his argument. I'd like you to repeat the speech one more time. Try to allow everything we focused on, the different types of argument and rhetoric, the variety and the length of the lists, the effect of the sudden change of length in the sentence structure, and the build of the rhythm that gives the text. Allow it all to inform your delivery. Picture clearly who it is you're speaking to. Or, if you're in a room full of people, find a partner and deliver it to them. Did it differ from your first reading? And did your impressions of the content of the speech change or perhaps intensify as we worked on it? We're now going to take a look at some of the text from later in the same scene. The Christians have left the stage, and Tubal, another member of the Jewish community, informs Shylock that despite his search, there is no news of Shylock's daughter. Read it aloud, as ever, and see what you think. What are your first responses? Although, crucially, it is, as I said earlier, open to interpretation. This depiction of Shylock seems to be rooted in anti-Semitic tropes. It appears mere moments after the speech we've just looked at. Does it seem at odds with the first section of text we explored? I want to look at how we can use interpretive choice to explore the different possibilities contained within each piece of text. What are they? Well, people process grief and loss in different ways. I'd like you to choose at least 2 different ways to read this speech. You can, of course, come up with your own 2 contrasting options, or choose from some of the options on the screen. Make sure the 2 you pick feel very different. I'll give you a few minutes. In rehearsal rooms, we often play with extreme choices. Finding out something definitely doesn't work can be just as instructive as finding something that we feel does. We don't know what Shakespeare was thinking when he was writing The Merchant of Venice. We never will. Shylock was almost definitely intended as the villain, the antagonist of the story. His rage and his determination to have his pound of flesh are confronting and undeniably horrifically violent. However, some of his language is, in my opinion, some of the most powerful in the whole of the Shakespearean canon. It is impossible to ignore the persecution he has suffered in the oppressive circumstance he lives in. It is also remiss to ignore the fact that a lot of his character seems to rely on anti-Semitic tropes. If Shylock is our villain, The Christians against whom he struggles must therefore be our heroes. They are, however, far from perfect. Their abuse of the Jewish community is described on numerous occasions by both them and Shylock. Antonio, the merchant, freely admits to spitting at Shylock in the street and says he'd do so again. Deeply racist sentiment that's often omitted from productions include Portia's lines regarding the Prince of Morocco. Upon hearing that he is on his way to try and win her hand in marriage, she says, "If he have the condition of a saint and the complexion of a devil, I had rather he should shrive me than wive me." By complexion of a devil, she means black or dark-skinned. When he chooses the wrong casket and therefore fails to win her hand, she says, "Good riddance, go. Let all of his complexion choose me so." This blatant and casual racism is, for a modern audience, something that undoubtedly affects how we view the character of Portia. She can no longer exist as a simple heroine, a fiercely intelligent woman who comes and saves the day. As restricted as she is by the misogynist society she exists in, she is complicit in the mistreatment and the denigration of the non-white, non-Christian community around her. The society depicted in the play is riddled with prejudice, anti-Semitism, racism, tribalism, and polarisation. There are discussions as to whether this play should still be performed at all. It was used as propaganda in 1930s Nazi Germany, but it has also been used as a rallying cry for religious and racial tolerance for hundreds of years, a reminder that humans are far, far more alike than we could ever be different. Is it a play about anti-Semitism and racism, which in Shakespeare's time had a slightly different meaning? The word race encompassed not just a person's ethnicity, but also their cultural and religious identity. Or is it an anti-Semitic and racist play? There is no easy answer. This is a malleable text in which we see the characteristic complexity that occurs in so many of Shakespeare's plays and in so many of his characters. For me, and you may of course have a very different opinion, it is this complexity, this inability to truly call any one of the characters in the production good, that saves this play for me. The polarisation and the vilification of the other, woven into into the fabric of the society that's depicted, and the near lethal danger it presents, for me, shows me something about how we live now. I think this play reminds us of our flaws, our vulnerabilities, and ultimately of our humanity. Thank you so much for taking part in the workshop today. I hope that by engaging physically with this text, by speaking it aloud and hearing the words in your own voice, you've experienced, maybe found something new. I hope it's provoked thought and questioning, hopefully ownership of this incredible writing. Thanks again.